So welcome to this webinar. We will be talking about the new releases, Airlock Gateway 7.7 and Airlock Microgateway 3.0. If you're having questions during the webinar, there's actually a question tab in the control panel. You can open that and add questions there. And in the end, I will go through the questions and try to answer them. Okay, so the agenda of the webinar is oriented around the new features. And as you may know, the Microgateway actually shares the security core with the Airlock Gateway. So there's certain features that are available on both components, and some of them are available only on the gateway or on the Microgateway. You will see these symbols, the square and the circle on the bottom right of each slide to indicate which component I'm currently talking about. So let's start with the Airlock Anomaly Shield. But before going into what's new in 7.7, I'd like to address some general questions about the Anomaly Shield, like why do we need it? What is it doing? How does it extend the Airlock Gateway's features? So when we're talking about the main job a web application firewall has, then it's actually analyzing requests regarding malicious payloads. So is there something that looks like an attack going on? And as you probably know, we have deny rules that cover this topic. They are specifically crafted to detect, for instance, SQL injection attacks or cross-site scripting attacks, and try to detect evasion attempts and specific keywords from databases and so on. And also we've added threat intelligence feeds that provide IP addresses that are known to attack sources around the world. So if a client has been hacked, for instance, and is part of a botnet and it repeatedly attacked hosts, then you would already know by the IP address of the client that the likelihood is high that this client will probably try something suspicious. So that's how we can deal with known attack patterns or known clients, known bad clients. But when we're going into machine learning approaches, then there's something very nice that we can do. We can look beyond the scope of just a single request, and we can analyze patterns between requests. For instance, the timing. Does the timing look like if there's a user interacting with the application, or does it look rather like a script being deployed, something automated? Is it coordinated from different IP addresses? So do we see lots of different client IPs in the same session? That's very unlikely if a user is surfing on a website or using an application. Also, maybe the rate of error status codes in the backend. If this rate is very high, it's also very likely that there's something bad going on. So we can extend the request analysis through session analysis, and that's exactly what the Anomaly Shield is doing. And it gives us a way of also protecting applications from today unknown attack patterns, because we can simply see what's normal, what's the normal behavior of users with an application, and then see what is abnormal and then treat that in a special way. And we think it's really useful to combine these two approaches to actually solve the known attack vectors with the features that we already know. And we in the first version of machine learning, we also tried to do the job of deny rules using machine learning, but we were not able to reach the same precision. So it was very hard to have rules generalize into what the deny rules can actually do. So if we look at Anomaly Shield in more detail, as I said before, it's rather focused on the behavior of a client in a session. It does not look at precise characters in a payload. It adapts to each application individually. It may perfectly be okay for an API to be used by automated clients. Then maybe rather user activity is anomalous. So it depends on the API or on the application. So you have to learn normal behavior for each application individually. And one means that you have is to adjust the sensitivity of the anomaly shield, because during the learning phase there are certain thresholds that are learned from the traffic, and depending on how low you set these thresholds, you will get more alarms or less alarms. So if you think that you have lots of false positives, you can adjust these thresholds. Our solution is really data privacy aware, because it does not upload any request information or even statistics about sessions to a cloud or to a central service at Airlock. It all remains on the gateway nodes. And it has low maintenance because it uses unsupervised learning techniques. So it's not like you have to, it's not like you're being presented questions all the time. Is this good? Is this bad? So you can you can simply collect traffic, run training, and then use that. And no performance impact. That means the request processing as we know it is not actually delayed due to the machine learning technology. If you're running if you're having a system with very high load, like you're using 60% or more of CPU in normal operation, then we recommend to upgrade the hardware or the virtual machine resources. But it's only because the machine learning will run asynchronously and also requires some resources. But the ordinary pipeline of request processing is not affected by this. Okay, so how do you actually use the Airlock Anomaly Shield? So first you have to configure it. You have to, of course, turn it on. As I mentioned, it's analyzing session statistics, so it's only meaningful if you're having sessions on an application. If you know that you're running penetration tests or running vulnerability scans from some nodes, then you can exclude them. There's IP address patterns that can be used for exceptions, or you can base it on a header or some other type of signal that you say I can identify my scanning hosts. So it's best to exclude them from training. Otherwise, the Anomaly Shield thinks that it's normal to be scanned. And then you're having a learning phase. You have to collect some live data. We usually say you need around 100,000 requests for the learned model to be meaningful, but that can be across all sessions, of course. You don't need one session with that many requests. And then you execute the training. And then you're ready to actually enforce the Anomaly Shield. You have different options to handle anomalies. You can only lock them and then treat them in an external system, maybe feed them to a CM or something. You can block the IP. Typically, that's temporarily locked for 1 hour. You can adjust that, of course. You can also terminate the session. In future releases, we're thinking about removing roles from a session. So you may know step-up authentication, where you maybe log in using a password and you get some basic roles for accessing the general parts of an application. But when you're moving to a sensitive part, you are required to enter your second factor, and your session will be upgraded. So that's one idea we have. If the session is anomalous, we will just downgrade it, and we will remove sensitive roles. And if it's actually a user and everything is valid, then he will just have to click an OK on Airlock 2FA app or something to be upgraded again. So that's an idea that we have for the future. And so what's new on Gateway 7.7? In 7.6, the Airlock Anomaly Shield was available, but it had to be configured using expert settings, which, I mean, okay, there's quite a lot of settings, and it's not very, yeah, nice to do that in that way. So in 7.7, it has been integrated into the configuration center. So you have graphical user interfaces for configuring applications, for configuring patterns and triggers and exceptions and all that. And of course, that's not the end of the feature. We're still adding more usability and more sensors to the feature. So stay tuned. There will be more. And currently, there's the innovation program actually going on until next spring, where we have customers actually testing it, using it, giving feedback in a short loop. Okay, just to show you where you find that in the GUI. On the mapping, there's a new box on the basic tab where you can add a mapping to an Anomaly Shield application. So we found out that it's really, you shouldn't train per mapping, because typically applications that belong together logically are spread over different mappings. So you can say these two mappings actually represent one application. And so you can add them to a machine learning application, and then you will have a model trained specifically for these 10 mappings. And then you can go and configure triggers and rules. I'm just showing here that we have this pattern page. We have, what you see here is that we have different sensors that are trained by the machine learning algorithms. So for instance, aggressive timing, that's what I mentioned, are requests coming like very, very quickly after each other, or is it rather looking like a human behavior? Then we have content type ratios, counts of requests, IP change rate, different status code sensors. We're clustering them and using SVM technology to actually trying to separate sessions according to their status code behavior. So what you can do here, if you try to model a botnet client, for instance, you can say, okay, it is a botnet client if the count of requests is anomalous. So that's the red dot here. You will say this sensor needs to be in an anomalous state, and all the others, I don't care. That's the gray dot. And then you can say with a new line, you can say, or I think it's botnet likely if the IP change rate is high. Or on the third line, you can say if the status code cluster is anomalous. That also is the red dot. And the green dot means that a certain sensor must be in normal state. So you can specify conditions saying this one must be abnormal, but this one must be in a normal region, and for the others I don't care. So you're very flexible in defining these anomaly patterns here. Okay, so I'd like to go to the next feature. It's the JWT, JSON Web Token Key Sets. And as you see already from the symbols, it's available on the gateway and on the microgateway. Of course, configuration is different. So what's this all about? So as you may know, we have this Jot access control feature where you can actually extract, validate, inspect JSON Web Tokens on the gateway and on the microgateway, and then you can take access control decisions based on this token and on the claims that are available in the token. You could, for instance, say if a certain claim has a value of X, then I will translate that into a role on the session, which then will give access to the client. So how do you use that feature today? First step, an administrator needs to configure the Jot Key in the Airlock Gateway configuration center. You can do that manually or using the REST API, but it needs to be done. Then the client, after authentication, receives a signed token from an IDP. It can be Airlock IAM or another IDP capable of issuing these tokens. the client sends this token to the gateway. Gateway validates it, the signature, if it's encrypted, it's decrypted, and so on, checks whether it's still valid. And now the critical problem here is if the key for these tokens changes because they're expired, or you have a breach or something, or you just want to rotate keys, then you have to go through all of that again. So you have to reconfigure the key on the gateway. And now using these key sets, it's actually possible to not configure the keys directly, but to give a URL and point to a server that actually provides these keys for Jot tokens. And so this step one is much more dynamic. Yes, the administrator configures the URL, but then the gateway will periodically fetch the current key sets from the IDP. And the rest is actually the same. So clients authenticate, send tokens with varying keys, and the Airlock Gateway is always up to date using the current keys. So that's very, very useful because you no longer need manual key management, and the keys are actually controlled by the central IDP. And you can enforce higher security because you can have short-lived keys. So if you breach them, if you lose them, if someone stores it to an Amazon S3 storage, then you can quickly react and you know, okay, they're only valid for a week, so it should be over by now. And as I said, the feature is also available in Airlock Microgateway, so you can do the same there. Regarding different properties, the keys are refreshed on configuration or on configuration reload, but at least every 2 hours. So if you're not changing the configuration, it will periodically be reloaded. And you can, of course, change this interval. The keys are also cached locally. So in case your key server is not reachable, you can use the most recent keys that you got from the key server. Otherwise, it could be really it could be dangerous. For instance, if the server is down during a reboot of the gateway, you may actually be in a state where you cannot validate any token because you're missing current key sets. So caching them locally gives you more freedom here and high availability. If you don't want to use a URL, you can also add the key sets locally as you did before. It's just that the format has changed, so you actually have to use this key set format, but you can easily transfer your keys into this, and it will also be migrated. So on the gateway, if you're using the Jot feature with keys, when you upgrade to 7.7, it will just be wrapped in a key set, and you can just go on. On the Microgateway, on the other hand, because we're not migrating the config YAML, you have to do that manually. Okay, so let's go on. Prometheus Metrics. That's actually very interesting. It's a feature that we first published on the Microgateway because it's very important to be able to monitor container deployments. And for instance, you can use it to develop dashboards for operation control. And if you're looking at the Minikube example that we provide for the Elec Microgateway, we have used Grafana to collect these Prometheus metrics and show some really nice dashboards that give you a very good picture of how many microgateways you have in your cluster, how much load there is on all of these microgateways by services, by namespace. You can filter, and it's very nice. It gives you a good picture of what's actually going on. And now in Gateway 7.7, it's also available on the Airlock Gateway. So if you're having a mixed environment, you can actually collect all of these metrics in one central dashboard from the gateway and from the microgateways. So here's an overview of the metrics that we expose. It's regarding the workload of an instance, the number of requests it's processing, also some security-related statistics, like how many blocked requests do we see on a gateway, rejected requests, processing times. So you will detect if a microservice protected by a gateway is having performance issues, for instance, number of sessions, and also throughput. That's relevant if for licensing. If you're not using the community edition of the microgateway, for instance, then you will buy a license based on the peak throughput rate that you're using. As always, we are hardening our deny rules. You may know that we are running this HackerOne bug bounty program. We learn a lot from global hackers, ideas that we are not aware of. And it's really, really interesting how it helps us to improve and harden our rules, but also reduce the false positive rate of rules, because it's always easy to block everything. The really hard part is to block everything that's bad and accept everything that's good. One thing you need to know if you're deploying add-ons on the add-on Tomcat in the gateway is that we have upgraded Java on the system to version 11, and that also affects the add-on Tomcat. So any add-ons that you deploy must be compatible with Java 11. And in particular, if you're building custom ICAP filters with our SDK version 2.2 or earlier, you should rebuild your service using version 2.3, because we facilitated compatibility with Java 11 and removed some dependencies that were causing problems when running on a Tomcat and Java 11. The new version of the SDK is available for download on the tech zone. And some miscellaneous things. We improved network configuration time actually regarding IP changes. So we're now computing the actual difference between the current configuration and the new configuration, and we only apply IP address changes for new or removed IP addresses. In the past, we just removed all the IP addresses and added all the new ones, so that costs an extended downtime if you're having hundreds of IP addresses on your virtual hosts. And in addition, we made some other minor optimizations, and we can say that we substantially reduced the time window where you could actually have network connectivity issues during an activation. Then, as you may know, we use open API specifications to enforce API calls towards backends and check them whether they are valid. And now we actually provide an own open API specification for our configuration REST API. So we're not only consuming those specifications, we're also providing them for you. And we hope that facilitates developing code, developing clients that use our REST API. An interesting feature is that you can now use a remote Airlock IAM for authenticating administrators on the configuration center. So if you're having requirements that you want to use two-factor authentication for your administrators, you may even want to use Airlock 2FA, you can now do that using an Airlock IAM and treat the configuration center just as you would any other application and authenticate with that. The CSRF token is injected to protect you against cross-site request forgery, but it's kind of problematic for native clients, for instance, apps that are not able to handle the JavaScript code and cookie handling that's required by this protection feature. So we automatically turn the feature off if a client is using header-based session handling. So that gives you the option to use different clients, browser-based clients, apps, on the same mapping using the CSRF token, and it will be disabled for clients that cannot act upon it. And of course, you will get OS and components updates. That brings us already to the last feature, the Yamas Schema. If you're using the microgateway, you're familiar with the configuration YAML file. It's a domain-specific language. It has keys and values that are available. It's documented in the manual. And now we're providing a formal schema for this configuration language. So on the right, you see this animation. You can integrate the schema into developer environments. For instance, Visual Studio Code supports YAML schemas, but also other IDEs will support that. And that actually helps you in code completion. So as you see, you can press, if you're on a certain level in the configuration file, you can press Control Space and it will just offer you all the valid keys that you can use at this position. Or it will automatically check the syntax. If you're having a typo in a keyword, it will highlight that and say, that's not a valid keyword, please change that. Or if you hover over a keyword, it will show you the documentation for this feature. So it really facilitates developing these configuration files a lot. To give you an overview over the recent microgateway releases, so 2.1 was released in July, and 3.0 was released now in the beginning of November. As I mentioned, the core security component is shared with the gateway. So 2.1 is still on gateway 7.6 and 3.0 now is on 7.7. With 2.1, the community edition was really a very interesting feature. If you're not aware of this, there's the Airlock Microgateway webinar. It took place 2 weeks ago. It's also recorded and available on our YouTube channel. So it's really nice if you want to start using the microgateway, but you don't have any budget, or you're not sure if you want to use it. You don't want a trial license. You can just use it from Docker Hub, and it has all the basic features available to you. Yes, so that's about what I wanted to say. Now I will have a look at the questions tab. So if you have questions, just type it in. I will go through. If I see correctly, there's no question yet. So I suggested we wait for another 2 or 3 minutes if there are questions coming up. Of course, the webinar is recorded, and if you have colleagues that were not able to attend it, you can always share the link with them. It's available on TechZone and also on our YouTube channel. So if you're having a question, there's the question tab on the control panel where you can actually add these questions. So if there are no questions, I think we can close the webinar. Of course, you can always contact us through email or by phone if you're having questions. There's also the Microgateway forum, actually, where you can add questions if you want to ask the community. That's also very interesting, and we launched that with Microgateway 2.1. But so I think we're closing the webinar here. thanking you for your attendance and your time.